Guys, I'm going to briefly explain to you when we talk about blood spatter. And I always put this on a test because it is not splatter. Okay? That's going to be a test question. If you answer splatter, no. I like it. It should be that, but it's not. It's spatter. Do not ask me why they picked this. I can't answer that, but it's called blood spatter. If you're a forensic scientist and you have a PhD in blood forensics, this is what we're talking about, blood spatter. In fact, let's talk about that for a second, because a lot of people will ask me, what career path should I take? Well, if you're interested in blood groups, the types of grouping of bloods, you're an O negative, you're an A, you're B. If you're a forensic scientist and I need your opinion on blood groups, we call that a serologist. If you're an expert on the tissue, and many times they're two different things. Many times I'm gathering tissue, especially when we're talking about high ballistic gunshot wounds. You'll have blood somewhere, but you'll also have tissue. It is what it is. It's gross. Brain matter, tissue from the skin, tissue on a sexual assault, when you have skin under your fingernails. When we need someone to look at skin tissue, we call that a pathologist. And then what we're seeing a lot today, which is extremely important, is we want to match DNA to people. If you're an expert in DNA matching, then you're going to be a molecular biologist. As you can see, all three of these, I don't want you to be a criminal justice major. You have to be a specialist in that forensic science field. But having said that, certainly when I have CSI on the scene and we've got blood, remember, one component of evidence, circumstantial evidence. I don't want to convict anybody just on blood. If you've watched Dexter, which I've watched a few episodes, he's just trying to explain the actions of the suspect. Just like the fingerprints, or why are they in the crime scene? If we're looking at blood, sometimes the detective will be sitting back and going, wow, how did this happen? We can follow blood and how it leaves the body and determine what's going on. Who was doing what? Who was walking where? We can determine certain wounds on the body that you were dead and you didn't know it. Many times somebody in a crime scene is still up walking, but we can come in and look at the blood left 10 feet back, and the wound that they took from the police officer at that round hit an artery. You can tell by what's here. They were dead, they just didn't know it, and then they walked 10 feet, 15 feet. So we can determine this is where that shot hit them that ultimately took their life. And that becomes extremely important when we're trying to figure out which person killed what person. So when we start talking about blood spatter, I'm not going to ask you, obviously, on a test how to recreate any of these. But I want you to know certain terms that become extremely important when we get to court. Because that's ultimately what you're going to be doing, is identifying certain things. Certainly when we talk about blood in any type, at the basic component is what we call a spine. In fact, let me just write it up here, because in case I talk too fast. A spine. And I want you to come in here and I'm going to show you what a spine is as I drop this. As blood exits the body, and as it exits the body from different levels, they're going to make spines. We know with certainty because our blood's all the same. In fact, the viscosity of my blood in the lab is pretty close to what's in your body. So when I come upon a scene, when people are dripping, spines are drips. I know that when I see one drip come, if you get a focus on this, the spines are those things coming outward from the center of that blood drop. I know based on that drop, a scientist can tell me almost exactly the height of where did that come from. We know that when we look at spines, we know that when we do this, from a higher, the spines are going to be bigger. As you get closer, they're going to be smaller. The angle of impact is extremely important. We know that somebody was bleeding here, not moving, because the way the spines are perfect. But you can see, as the higher I get, here's a blood drop. Look at the spines, how they protrude. We know, and this is important because if our suspect is 6'4", and all of a sudden we're seeing blood, doesn't make sense. Why is blood here at this level? It just answers questions that we have about blood, okay? This is the most basic. Understand spines. A couple of other things that I want you to know. As we start to look at blood, for instance, I brought up the fact of an arterial bleed. In an arterial bleed, if somebody's walking, and this Officer-involved shootings, many times we have to determine which officer shot and killed the suspect. If you hit somebody in an artery on a body, we would expect it to be leaving the body in a way which is what? Every time the heart beats, we're going to see blood. So if I just took around to an artery in an arm or in a leg, and I'm walking and I have this blood on the ground, an expert's going to be expecting, say I got hit in my arm in an artery. As I'm walking, you're going to see this. Every time my heart beats, I'm going to have blood. So as I come back and I look at this evidence, come down here and look, you're going to see two things that are critically important. Number one, we can determine this was a heartbeat, arterial bleed. Number two, it came out of a height of 5'4". Probably going to be that wound on the body out of the arm was an arterial bleed. They were dead, they just didn't know it. You could also see the angle. We know based on the spines, if you look at these spines right now, the way they're showing, we know the way this person was walking. Because the way the spines are going outwards, you can see they're clearly moving in this direction. If you're trying to determine how many people did this person shoot before they fell over dead, you can recreate the way they're walking. If they've got an arterial bleed, I can recreate the entire walking path of that individual based on that alone. So arterial bleeds are extremely important to understand when you go to court. A couple of other things. You like how I'm wearing a robe so I don't get dirty. Okay? When we talk about, a swipe. Okay? When we get to court, a lot of times they're going to ask, okay, why is this important? We talked about fingerprinting last time. I'm going to leave behind a fingerprint, but with the swipe. Say I just did something. You're going to have blood on your hands. Say I trip and I fall and we come into a crime scene and all of a sudden I see something like that. Okay, we call this a swipe. A swipe is clearly somebody is tracking their blood across a secondary surface. These are called blood swipes. So if we can use a blood swipe, we know they were shot here. Say they were shot in the leg artery. They fall down. We can track and go, this is where they tried to gather themselves. They swiped, arterial bleed. This is extremely important to determine. Remember, you're going to do the blood type. You're going to have blood in these crime scenes from multiple different people. But blood types is extremely important. Don't confuse a swipe with what we call a cast off. Cast off. Let me write this up on the board. A cast off. Okay? A cast off is when, again, we have blood on a surface, but not necessarily on your hand. If somebody used this pickaxe and just put it in somebody's head, okay, and now we're looking at blood, a cast off is that. A cast off is blood leaving an object onto a secondary object. We can determine by the spines that this was a cast off. It's complicated, but what we're going to get to is I'm going to explain to you the velocity of blood right now. Velocity of blood. You can see on the cast off how big the droplets are, or the spines, because it's called medium velocity. My hand's not moving that fast. If I see something on a wall that has tiny, tiny droplets like this, look at this. This is mimicking high velocity blood. This would indicate, like on the wall, that this was blood left behind by somebody being shot with a gun, a 9mm. You know, if it was a .223, a rifle, you're going to have even tinier. This is what you would expect, okay? That's based on the momentum of that projectile. We'll get to that later when we talk about ballistics. But as you take this in, just no cast off, no spine, spatter. And again, a lot of times this comes into play with fingerprints. Remember we talked about you're leaving behind things, imprints, impressions. Nothing happens by itself. And for instance, we had a crime scene in Vegas where people were robbing, were going up and doing strong arm robberies and robbing people. They would hit you in your jaw. When you fell down on the sidewalk, they would wear big boots, not flip-flops, and then they would step on your jaw, knocking you out, still in your wallet and your purse. We were able to determine the shoe type and size based on them leaving. This is mimicking somebody's head that fell to the sidewalk. Your face, your head has a lot of blood. It is what it is. So when people do things, you're going to leave a lot of blood. So if someone came up here and stepped on this, now come and look at this. you're going to see the way that blood came out of their head. Not only are you going to see that, but what else are you going to see? Watch my flip-flop. Locard's principle of exchange, folks. When two things come into contact with one another, they always leave behind evidence. This here tells a story. It's an essay. If you do your job right, you can determine exactly what happened. Blood is fun, clearly. But again, I never want you to convict anybody on blood alone. It's all part of a bigger picture. Use this with fingerprinting on top of everything else, and hopefully you can draw a story together. If you have questions, send them to me online. See you next time.